Welcome everybody to Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. It is the 4 o'clock hour. It has been a busy day on Go Local Live. Kate Nagel, our news editor, was up at the State House early this morning with the governor, the mayor of Providence, and the new commissioner of education, talking about the Johns Hopkins report, which functionally found Providence's school system to be the worst in the United States ever analyzed by the education program at Hopkins. Not a ringing bell of endorsement from the governor's office. Secondly of all, Kate was just live up in the Senate as the key legislation is looking back like it's going to kick back and forth over some of these disclosure issues and reach back issues related to sexual abuse. That bill's looking to go in the Senate and will get kicked over to the House later today in action that's expected this evening. But right now with me is University of Massachusetts Lowell professor Morgan Marietta. He is also the co-editor of the SCOTUS series, the annual review of all the decisions of the Supreme Court. It is SCOTUS Supreme Court decision time. Professor, welcome to Go Local Live.
Thanks so much for having me here today. It's quite a week at the Supreme Court.
This is like the World Series, Super Bowl, Emmys, all those things wrapped up together for academics like yourself?
That's right. It is Super Bowl week for nerds. Yeah.
For legal nerds. You know, from the broader standpoint, give us some insights into what the early decisions have shown about the two new Trump appointees to the court.
Right. Yeah, it is very much a new Supreme Court now that we have 5 conservatives. And the thing about those 5 conservatives, though, they're not all the same.
Right.
Some of them are true originalists, meaning that they think that we should look at the original public meaning of the Constitution, but not all of them. Kavanaugh and Roberts are the ones that look like they're more willing to join with the liberal justices. They're willing to say some surprising things. Even Gorsuch has said some very surprising things in recent times. What I'd like to point out is that the court just ruled on double jeopardy, whether the state government and the national government could charge the same individual for the same crime. And the court said that that was acceptable. But the 2 dissenters were Ginsburg, RBG on the far left of the court, and Gorsuch on the right of the court. They dissented together, which is a very refreshing thing to see. I happen to think that both of the dissenters were right in that case, both Ginsburg and Gorsuch, and I don't get to say that much because they don't agree on very much.
Is this going to be the new, as sports betting goes sweeping across the country in states after the Christie decision a year ago? Is this going to be a new game that everybody's going to bet? Is how the Supreme Court comes down on some of these decisions?
I would put money on that game, only for legal. I enjoy that very much. But it would be hard to bet on some of these. Some of these, the ones that we really want to talk about today, the big cases coming down on elections, we just don't know how, especially the gerrymandering case, we don't know how that is going to come out. Kavanaugh might rule with the liberals. Roberts might rule with the liberals. So we don't know. That one's hard to bet. So, I do have a bet on the census case.
So let's talk the gerrymandering cases first. There are 2 before the court, Rucho versus Common Cause and Lemoyne versus Bensick. And we're in Providence, Rhode Island. We're great at gerrymandering. We've got congressional districts that make no sense, and at the local level, we've got state representative and state senate districts that defy any logic or normal boundaries in order to protect people or manipulate people or punish people. Give a little overview of how the court historically has been ruling on gerrymandering.
Right. Yeah, the thing about gerrymandering is that we invented it in New England. You know, that the term is named after one of the founding fathers, Elbridge Gerry. And after being a founding father, he was in the first Congress, and then he was the governor of Massachusetts. And in the early days of the Republic, it was Essex County the district of Essex County in Massachusetts. They formed it into this particular bizarre shape that looked like a salamander, they said, hence a gerrymander.
Right, right.
And from the very beginning, the court has faced this problem that when you talk about a right that you hold or I hold, an individual right recognized by the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, it's easy to say that you have a right and it's been violated and you can sue about it. But when it's not about voting rights, it's about an election being fair. It's about the rules of that election. It's not really clear if a right has been violated, whose right it was, who can sue. And the court has traditionally said that this is what they call a political question, or it's non-justiciable. It means that the representative branches have to handle this. And the court says they don't really have the power to get involved. And they're afraid that if they do, they look like they're ruling in favor of one party and they're partisan. So it's been very hard to recognize a right in these cases. But I think they just might do it this time.
So Republicans have been very, very good over the past couple of decades of controlling state legislators in order to control the redistricting of congressional seats, in order to protect as many of their incumbents, as well as to design congressional districts that would be most beneficial to the Republican Party. And that's allowed them to, in the up till recently, control the House of Representatives. And do we see something so distinguishable coming out of the Supreme Court that this might change this momentum for the Republicans that they've enjoyed really since the era of Reagan?
Well, we just might. And one of the reasons that we might is that there are these two cases being heard now. The one's out of North Carolina, and that's about Republicans. But the other one is out of Maryland, and that's about Democrats. And because it is somewhat balanced in this way, they just might decide to intervene. They're still facing a lot of problems, though. The one I mentioned, that it's not clear who holds the right and what that is. It could be equal protection under the 14th Amendment, but that's not very clear. I actually have my own view on this, that in Article 4 of the Constitution, the federal government does guarantee the states a Republican form of government. And the problem is that's not very clear, but it means at least that one party or one faction can't permanently put itself in power.
Right.
And that's really what this is about. It's about when one party's in control, do they manage to keep themselves in control? And to be clear, either party will do it. The reason Republicans have been doing it is because they won more seats in state houses around 2010 when the redistricting was happening. Democrats would do the same thing. They just haven't had the chance. So the court might just now do what actually Justice Breyer, it's one of the liberal justices, he came up with, I think, the answer that the four liberals and maybe Kavanaugh, maybe Roberts might join. Breyer's view is that if the gerrymander is truly extreme, if it's just truly ridiculous to the point that anyone can tell that it's there, I think his standard is that if you have less than a majority, less than 50% of the vote, and you still get 2/3 of the seats in a state house,
right,
everyone knows that something is wrong, and now we can fix it. I think they might just say that, but they might not. We'll see what
Well, when they legalize it in sports betting, you're going to actually have to make a definitive decision on that. Let's jump over to the U.S. Department of Commerce and the state of New York. This is the fight over the questions relating to the census. Conservatives say, hey, listen, we always ask this question for decades about legal status of those answering the census. Democrats, more progressives, have said, wait a minute, this is putting the chilling effect. People won't want to answer this question. They'll be afraid ICE will be at the door within hours of answering this question. Is that a fair definition of this case?
Yes, I think it is. Yeah.
And what do you see as the question before the court?
The problem with this one is that there's what I refer to as an Al Capone problem here. You recall that Al Capone was the murderer who was put in jail for tax evasion.
Right, right,
And
right.
there's a similar thing going on here. The big argument is that there's an intentional act by the Trump administration to discriminate against recent immigrants and Hispanics. The problem is the same thing that I mentioned about gerrymandering. The census case and the gerrymandering case are intimately connected in the sense that they're about the rules of elections.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a clear right that is being potentially violated. So they're doing a couple of smaller things. They're going after the tax evasion. There's three claims. The first claim is something called the Administrative Procedures Act,
Sure.
the EPA. The argument is that the Commerce Secretary didn't follow the right procedures. That's a very weak argument, and it's probably not going to win. And the real truth is, no one cares if you follow the right procedures or not.
Right.
No one is going to say, "Oh, we follow the right procedures, therefore it's okay."
Will that be a major component of the presidential Democratic debate tonight? They'll be talking about the Administrative Procedures Act.
Yeah, it's not a winner. The second one is the Constitution does require a count every 10 years. It's called the enumeration clause. It commands Congress to conduct this count. And there's an assumption that if they say count the population, they're saying count the population accurately. And if you intentionally count it inaccurately, and now you come to a real question, and this is how the liberals and the conservatives on the court will divide out. It depends on whether they trust social science. And when the social science nerds come along and say, we've done the statistical analyses, and this will have a 5% impact, which is what they're saying, that non-citizens will be 5% less likely to respond to the census. You either believe those estimates or you don't. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, famously called some of these analyses sociological gobbledygook, that we couldn't trust these things. And I'm afraid that's what they're going to say again on this, that they have some point here in that it's hard to know. Gerrymandering is normal. Everyone does it a little bit. The question is, when does it become huge?
Right.
And that's where Breyer's standard might come in here, that they famously said that pornography, no one can define it, but they know it when they see it. And a bad gerrymander, you just know it when you see it. But the real truth is the big claim is about discrimination toward Hispanics and immigrants. And that's not being heard by the court right now. They're just looking at...
And let me ask you one question. Someone who is illegally perceived to be undocumented illegally in this country, do they count against the census?
Well, no, this is... the answer is yes, right now under current law. But there's, this is part of the Al Capone argument, there's a huge debate about the nature of representation and citizenship that's about to happen. It's not in front of the court now, but I'm telling you that it will be in the future. And it goes like this. Say you had a state that has 10 million people.
Sure.
9 million are citizens, but 1 million are non-citizens. They green card holders, some of them might be here illegally. Under current understandings of the Constitution, the census counts all 10. Mm-hmm. And for electoral college and representation in Congress, they get the 10. But 1 million of them don't vote. Only the 9 million citizens vote. So 10 are represented, but 9 vote for and represent the other non-citizens through their votes. And when you explain that to people, half of them think that's fine, and half of them think, well, that's really weird that non-citizens are in fact represented. Of course, they can't vote anyway, and your vote as a citizen, or my vote as a citizen, represents them. And unfortunately, the Constitution is quite unclear about which one it ought to be, because it was written so long ago.
So let me ask you a question.
Political issue.
Rhode Island is facing the loss of a congressional seat in this census count. It's, I think we may lose one, Arizona, I believe, or Nevada may gain one. What would stop
New York?
New York? Rhode Island
should lose one.
Yeah, what would stop Rhode Island from going to another country and bringing in tens of thousands? I think we only need about 15,000. folks in to be counted in the census, then we would return them after the summer season. They could enjoy the beaches at Newport and then return them in order to protect the economic value of our congressional seat.
Right, right. Maybe that's too expensive. Rhode Island already has some budget issues, I hear. So that may be the problem. But you raise a valid question about how we ought to understand representation of citizens and non-citizens. And of course, in the Trump era, this is fraught with many, many different problems and very emotional disagreements. And the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on this. I don't think the case will be the one you describe, but there will be a case about whether states individually decide to count immigrants or not, or non-citizens or not. And if a future federal administration decides to not just discourage non-citizens, but very clearly start only counting citizens for representation, that will go to the Supreme Court and be a tremendous fight about the nature of American citizenship and representation.
While we have you in the last couple minutes, let me ask you a couple. You're a court watcher. Who's the most likely member of the court to leave next?
Right.
Is it Thomas or others?
Every year we put together this SCOTUS volume with a number of scholars around the country, and I was just emailing one today who was saying that he thinks Thomas is going to retire this year. That had crossed my mind. It's not a bad bet because Thomas does not want to be in the Ginsburg position.
Right.
And what I mean is I made this joke after the 2016 election about who was the second most unhappy woman in America. And the first being Hillary Clinton, but the second was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because she expected Clinton to win and to be replaced by a Democrat. Now she has to stay on the Supreme Court as long as Trump is there. And they're running a time clock about who will leave first. Thomas, I think, might retire in order to be replaced by a conservative. So it might well be Thomas who goes next. But we're facing some fascinating things. What I said about a 5-4 court, 5 conservatives and 4 liberals now, if it goes to 6-3, things will change tremendously. And the reason it's not entirely obvious, it's not just that they'll have 6 votes. It's not just what they decide on. It's what cases they take.
Right, absolutely.
It takes 5 to win a case, but it takes 4 to take a case, and the justices take whatever cases they want. When there are 4 originalists, 4 true conservatives on the bench, they will take tremendously different cases, and what the Supreme Court does will expand tremendously. So it all depends on whether Ginsburg, who knows 86, or Breyer, who is 81, if they stay on the bench and don't retire through the Trump first or possibly second administration. And if another conservative comes in to 6-3, it will change things in a very dramatic way. So the court watchers are putting bets on that as well.
Let me ask you a final question. Do you see Roe v. Wade being revisited in a significant way on one of these new southern states' new statutes that have passed in the most recent months via the legislature? Do you see one of these coming up and triggering a very significant overhaul of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, that's another question of what cases the court will take. Some of the states seem very keen on pushing that and making it happen, but not all the justices are willing to do it. 3 of them, I believe, are willing to take them and to overturn Roe. Thomas absolutely is. I believe Gorsuch is. I believe Alito is. But that is not entirely. Well, not entirely sure. Gorsuch is. Thomas is. I suspect Kavanaugh is, but we're not sure. I believe Roberts is not, and Alito, I'm unsure. And what I mean there is that they could do it, but I don't think they will until it's 6-3. Once it's 6-3, I think they'll take it and they will overturn Roe. In the meantime, the states want them to, but I think the court will resist.
Professor, I want to thank you so much. I hope we can tap into your expertise on a regular basis and get back in touch with you as these major decisions come out of the court. We'll be posting this. It'll be out on a slew of different social media sites right now as we're speaking. Then it'll get published tomorrow. It'll go out in about 50, 60,000 emails tomorrow. I think we'll post it on GoLocal Worcester as well. And hope we can get you back here more often. Thank you so much, Professor, and enjoy your sweet season at the Supreme Court.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Take care.
Thank you. And that wraps it up here. Go Local Live. Stay tuned for more up over the evening and back tomorrow. It is the final, looks like it's the final week at the legislature, and lots going on with the reform of the Providence school system. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.